As someone who enjoys trying out a bunch of different programming languages, creating GUI applications is always a problem that comes up. Because if you're creating tools for yourself, small programs, or just playing around, it's often nicer to have a desktop application running than have to go through the process of deploying a web application and, shelling out money for a server or something like that. So I've come across WebView related libraries like Wails, which is quite a nice wrapper for WebView for Go with some functionality on top. In fact, originally, I think it was Tori that I first heard about WebView libraries. I haven't tried it out for a long time. I think it was like pre 1.0 last time I looked at it, and I don't know, felt kind of clunky. I'm not the biggest fan of Rust anyway, so it wasn't really my kind of thing. Anyway, from Tori I came across Wails, and that seemed pretty nice. If we go and look at the docs, they basically have a command line tool which builds you can use to develop or build the program, and the whole process is just pretty nice because you get hot reloading through the whatever kind of front end you're using. I mean, if you're using, I don't know if they manually handle reloading for vanilla, but if you're doing something like Svelte, that has built-in reloading. So when you're developing, it spins up all this for you. Basically runs the front-end build and the back-end build consecutively. So basically the biggest problem with Wails, at least for personal projects, is Go is not a massively interesting language. And I don't want to completely discredit Go because I use it at work and it works really well. If I wanted to just get work done, I would probably use Go if I was shipping a desktop app, because there's a lot of stuff you just don't want to worry about that's kind of handled for you. Ecosystem's good, builds are good, cross-compatibility and all that. But when you work on a personal project, you kind of want to have more fun with it and do something interesting, try something different. Basically what you can do whatever you want, and so picking languages that your boss might not want you to use at work for whatever reason, maintainability, bus factor and so on, that can be a great chance to learn new things and look at the world in a different way. So taking the next step beyond Wails, I went to search for WebView wrappers or bindings, and I came across this one. There's a few others, but this one's just basically the first one I found, and it's pretty much, I think it's just a header with 8 functions or something to get WebView functionality running, and obviously written in C, so it's incredibly easy to port. If we take a look at the examples, so this is kind of like your hello world, which is ridiculous, because of the availability of C FFI and bindings. This basically trivializes getting a lightweight GUI application in any language, which is something that I've wanted for a long time. Obviously there are trade-offs, but we're up to a pretty good start here. So beyond the wrapper or the library, the C library that provides WebView bindings, I had a look at implementing a basic version in Lisp. Here you can see this is just the wrapper layer, which is just simply wrapping the C functions that are provided. We also have some platform-specific bindings here, which are useful for kind of native functionality which WebView doesn't provide. Like, for example, this was used for setting specific window options, I think it was always on top I had, which I find really useful for development, because sometimes if you have library load in Lisp or something like that, the new window, when you spin a new window up, has a tendency to appear behind your editor, for example, and then you don't actually know if it's running or not. So if you keep it always on top, then you avoid that problem. Then after setting up binding, we basically just have this code to actually call the dynamic library and get it running. So in terms of an actual library, if you develop this as a library that you wanted to provide to users, what would the actual library look like beyond the pure bindings? Because you want to kind of smooth over some of this functionality. So I took inspiration from Clojure Effects. The idea there was have state, which is like a persistent version of your app, and the UI just reflects that at any given moment. So we have this app class which kind of encapsulates, well, it sort of encapsulates too much in a way, but we have like window options and some of the like internal functionality for handling events, and then other more kind of lower level internal stuff for managing the web view, and then the state itself, which is what the user kind of works with. So this is what the user code looks like. So we have our create app with some properties which the library knows about how to handle. We have our single handler callback, which does all the event processing, and a render function as well. This is useful for debug to get a kind of binding to the app, so we can do things like refresh. So you get like a hard refresh if you need it. The events themselves are a multi-method, and basically it's hooked up so that the kind of key you provide in this dispatch will then find its way back to here through the library's plumbing itself. And this doesn't have to be a symbol necessarily, it can be whatever, where we just need to have a way to dispatch. And you don't even have to do a multi-method here, you can just do whatever you want. An if or cond or something would be fine. So essentially we have this render function which is using Spinneret, which I don't particularly love, and we take the state which comes from up here, and this is just typical kind of rendering functionality. And Spinneret just does its own thing here, but this dispatch is basically like, it's actually pretty basic. It's just returning a string, which is like a JavaScript function call, which you can see here. We have the key, which is our symbol from the user code, and then an optional payload. And basically, we're just using paren script to output some JavaScript code. I was originally using a string here, but Spinneret works with paren script, and it's just tends to be easier to get consistent output by using the two together. So we're just basically saying call dispatch, which is the JavaScript function provided by the internal library binding with the string representation of key, and then whatever the payload might be. And I think if you have an object, I think it gets converted to an A-list. So if I run this, here we have a GUI in Common Lisp, just like that, with, let's see, 150 lines of code, but there is a bit more functionality than that. So we have this kind of choose folder functionality, and then update the UI in response to that. There's nothing in these files, but you can like open a file and then close a folder, and that's kind of like state management. One of the nice things about working with Lisp is if you want to have live reload, that kind of just works inherently. You don't have anything on top of that. And I always found that the live reload worked better in Lisp than in Clojure. So basically you compile anything and it just kind of gets picked up, whereas in Clojure you have to sort of design the code more like with references and stuff. So if I made some changes, for example, to the style sheet, recompile that. This is why we're using def parameter, so we can recompile. And then I think we provide this refresh UI function, so if I do, that's as easy as live reload gets, I think. So there are basically two issues with this so far, and I don't know to what extent they bother me. Obviously, in terms of good things, we have this kind of expressive, declarative way of writing UIs and events. It's multi-threaded, so we have some like good potential for UI performance and long-running threads and things like that. But in terms of bad things, firstly, this is more like a WebView general one, or kind of in a sense like using a lightweight binding. Obviously, we get the benefit of having small binaries and lightweight efficient code, and we kind of know everything that's going on. But things like Wails might provide more kind of functionality in terms of day-to-day writing of applications. You might get some stuff there which is handy. So for example, here we have a function. This is what gets us our file picker, because when you're calling WebView, it's sandboxed. So if you have something like a input file control, it will basically give you back a sandboxed path. So it will be like fake name, and you won't actually be able to get any valuable input out of that. But the point is that you have to do everything yourself, and that might be annoying, especially if you need more specific kind of platform behavior. The other, almost more fundamental problem is I don't really like using Spinneret, but I also don't want to write my own library for generating HTML from Lisp. But I just feel like something about this code is like inherently ugly or hard to read, and it feels like this isn't a long-term solution to creating a good GUI library, which is sad because you get a lot of benefits. Could use templating, but then you kind of lose the interoperability, and I kind of want like everything to keep the same language across both the front end and the back end, or I suppose alternatively have some kind of JavaScript framework and hack something in there, like protobuf or something. You could have a representation of the same data struct and generate the code, which is kind of seamless between the two. But then that's a lot of overhead, hassle, functionality that you have to keep on top of, and it's just another stage of building or something like that. So yeah, aesthetically, this doesn't bring me joy, which is a shame. And part of it is that I don't know how much I can trust Spinneret or ParentScript. I've tried to use ParentScript in the past and found it a bit limited. And obviously, JavaScript itself has moved on a bit in terms of like capability. So we're targeting like very basic JavaScript code with ParentScript, which doesn't necessarily get us where we want to be. So F#, because they have Fable, which also outputs very good JavaScript code. And then with Fable, for example, there's Felith for React's bindings. So you get, like the good front-end functionality, but also all-in-one language, interop between the two. That seems very appealing to me in terms of the language, like how interesting is it? I don't know. I mean, I like F#, but I mean, you can't do things like the reloading that you can in Lisp. You just don't get that kind of incredible DX that you might be able to get from Clojure as well. The other thing with F#, I suppose, is that, I don't know, this is like, it's not really the way I want to think about personal projects, but given the way the job market is these days, it would be nice to have something kind of work adjacent. I mean, I suppose that's where Go can be useful, but people aren't really writing GUI apps anymore, so from that perspective, maybe that doesn't matter. But, for example, a lot of jobs in the UK seem to be Java, and Java has good support for GUI development. I don't know. If I wanted to develop my career and gain skills that I could put on my CV, for example, then Java might be good. Anyway, the point is, I feel bad. Say, for example, I feel bad picking F# because it's not something that really drives my CV work, but I also don't want to use Java, for example, that I would be able to put on my CV and say I've got experience with this. So it's a tricky one. I mean, these days, or as I get older, I'm fighting more the struggle between what's fun and what's beneficial for my career in case my job became unstable or I had to get a new one. With a job market as tight as it is these days, maybe something like F# could be a differentiator because you show like you have the passion to be interested in different technologies. I don't know. And also, what's the deal with F# these days? Like, I don't necessarily have great faith in Microsoft either. For, there's a lot of reasons you might not want to have faith in them. But in terms of their business strategy, from an outsider's look, whatever they're doing with AI seems to be questionable. Whatever they're doing with Azure seems to be questionable. If you actually try to use Azure, it's incredibly painful. And then in terms of desktop applications, they basically ditch every kind of GUI framework that they come out with, and then Avalone has taken over Maui, at least for Linux, I think. F# always seemed to be more separate from all that, but again, they are sort of, my belief is that they are somehow funding F# development. I'm not entirely sure about the story of F#. But obviously that doesn't matter for like fun little projects, but everything kind of fits together at some level, doesn't it? And it's tricky to know. Like when I was younger, I would just, work with whatever and I wouldn't even think about it. But these days, I spend more time away from the computer than I used to, which I see as a good thing, but it's like when I am doing programming stuff for fun, I don't know, maybe this is just how we're all cursed these days. Maybe I should just not worry about it and just carry on. Yes, I got it working. There we go. So we have something. Now, what remains to be seen is what the interrupt looks like. Could we have like a separate library here for handling? One of the nice things that Wails does is auto-generate bindings and names and stuff for you, whereas when we're handling it ourselves, we have to come up with our own kind of process. So here we're manually having a handle to the window, and what would be nice is if we could separate the kind of binding layer so that we have some kind of package or something, or a library that has the shared kind of logic between the front end and the back end, but we'll figure that out later.